Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a very special guest. This is my aunt Naseem, and I'm going to be asking her a lot of questions about her life. You guys know I have had like quite a crazy life. I've lived all over the place, but it stemmed from my family and their childhood and upbringing, and actually Naseem kind of raised me in a way, and I grew up in this home that we're in, so I'm so excited to be doing this with you. Thank you so much for
no problem
doing it with me. And yeah, she has a lot of wisdom. She's gone through so much, and it's been a wild ride, so I'm excited to share everything with you guys.
Okay, so my name is Naseem Momin. I'm Natasha's aunt on her mother's side. I guess we're Indian. We lived in East Africa and then in Uganda, and we came over after Idi Amin kicked the Asians out. And that was many years ago, almost 50 years ago, in 1972.
I have some questions that I'm going to ask Naseem about her past, and yeah, I'm sure you guys are going to be pretty appalled by everything because it's quite the history. So let's start off with my grandparents, your parents. So you are my mom's sister. You guys have 8 siblings, so a huge family.
Yes, big, huge, but it wasn't unusual at the time.
Yeah, it was. The families were quite big back then, and especially like in India, they had a lot of children too.
Yes.
So let's talk about Ma and Papa. So these are my grandparents. They are both from India. And can you tell me a bit about?
Yes. So Ma and Papa, my mom and dad, grew up in a small village in northwest India, in the state of Gujarat. And we belong to a small community that are known as the Momins, which is where our name comes from. But they grew up as farmers. Their parents were farmers, small farmers, very small farms. They used to have dairy, mostly dairy. They grew their own vegetables and crops, and then they kept water buffalo to sell milk. And some of the villagers, and I don't think it was my parents, but they actually raised the animals and then took them to Bombay, where they were able to sell the milk from those cows, where there was a better market, and then they would bring all the food and the hay from the small village in North India, about 300 miles away, into Bombay. So that was maybe in the 1920s, 30s, and that kind of lifestyle continued, maybe even until the 1960s. So my father's father was one of the very few people out there who decided that he was going to send one of his sons. There were 2 boys in the family, my dad and his brother. He was going to send one of his sons to college because he wanted to educate his at least one child, try to get up in life. And so my dad was the one that got sent to high school and then college. And maybe there was one other person in that community at that time, in that generation, that went to college. So he was the first one. And while he went to college, he used to tell me stories about how they would get up in the morning, milk the cows, deliver the milk to the villages where it needed to be, and then go to school. So it was a kind of a hard life, a simple life. Well, when he graduated, he was already married, and I think he might have already had my 2 oldest sisters. There were no jobs in that part of India for a college graduate at the time. There were too many graduates in India, even though in his village there weren't any. He was one of the first ones. So an opportunity came up. There were a lot of Indians moving to East Africa, or had moved to East Africa, which also used to be under the British, to build railroads and to help with other things. And those folks who had moved out there were now needing services, and one of them was education for their children. So they were looking for teachers, and India was a place where they were finding these graduates who were willing to go over to teach. So that's how my dad ended up in East Africa on a 3-year contract.
Oh, and then you were born there, right?
Well, then what happened? He was supposed to come back. My mother and my 2 oldest sisters were still in India, but my dad, Papa, liked it so much over there that he decided he was going to have the family come over. So then before his contract was up, I guess they renewed or made him permanent. I don't know how it was. But my mom and my two oldest sisters then sailed over to East Africa. At that time, he was on the coastal town of Mombasa.
They went on boat.
They went on boat.
They didn't fly. Oh, there were...
No, there were, I think, airplanes at that time, but flying even in... I'm thinking this was like 1952, 1953. It was very expensive and not as common as it is right now. So they sailed over. It was a 10 or 11 day journey. First, they had to pack up, take a train ride to Bombay. It's about 300 miles. They probably stayed there with relatives for a day or two, and then they were put on a boat 10 days to Mombasa, where they met my dad.
Wow. Mombasa, Kenya.
Mombasa, Kenya, which is on the coast, and that's where my dad was. And at that time, even though the three East African countries were divided, because it was all under British, if you were working in some capacity with the government or some school organizations, it didn't really matter which country you worked in.
And this is Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda.
Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. And Bapa ended up, he started teaching in Mombasa, which was Kenya. And then once he decided he was going to become permanent, there were at that time a lot of trading posts established by these Indians. So there was a small village called Voi, and I think that might be another 200 miles west of Mombasa in the interior. And there was a small trading post where they must have had like 3 or 4 or 5 villagers, Indians, who were establishing a small primary school, and they needed a teacher. And my dad then went there with his family, and that's where I was born some 2-3 years later.
Which
in Voi, Kenya.
Oh, okay. So you were born in Kenya.
I was actually born in Kenya.
Okay, because my mom was born in Kampala, Uganda.
In Uganda, yes.
And then, you guys...
So shortly after I was born, then Bapa was given another position, same thing, teaching in one of these village schools that were coming up. And that was in Uganda. And it was in a very small village called Nagrama, only about less than 50 miles from Kampala.
Yeah.
So that's where just about all the rest of the girls were born, because as you know, out of the 8 kids, we're 6 sisters who were all older, and then the 2 boys.
Yeah.
So then the rest of the 4 girls, 3 girls, I was born in Kenya, and then the 3 youngest were born in Uganda, close to, in Kampala, actually in a hospital in Kampala.
Yeah, I think we stopped by the hospital where...
Right.
They were born. I went to Uganda and Tanzania a couple years ago. Actually, Naseem went too. We went at the same time, but kind of in 2 separate groups because our family's so big. But it was an incredible experience. I love East Africa. It's beautiful. It has so much diversity, and the food is incredible. The nature, the people are amazing. The music's really good too. I really like the music there. And it's funny because actually a lot of like music in the US that we listen to roots from Africa, and the beats and the drumming and all of that. So really interesting.
It is very interesting, yes.
And the national parks, of course, the Serengeti and which one?
Murchison Falls National Park, Elizabeth National Park.
Can you tell me about your childhood in Africa? What was that like? Because I know a lot of people probably think of Africa and then they think of like civil wars or poverty or things like that. But in reality, Africa, and especially when I was there, is quite different than what it was like back then. But Africa actually has so much like civilization. Is very advanced, actually. So
very diverse, and as you are saying, you will find all of those things, a lot of poverty, people who still live in small remote villages and maybe more traditionally, and then you will have your small towns and your cities where everything is quite modern. You have running water, you have apartments like you have here, you have houses like you have here, but it is poor, and you can see even when you're in a city with the traffic,
pollution,
yes, and then poor people, there's very little zoning. So you'll see these poor housing all kind of, together. And so it's a little bit different. When I was growing up, village life was maybe a little bit different than city life. And in the villages, they were small, and even though many of them had running water and had electricity, you probably didn't have the shopping centers and restaurants and all that you would find in the city, simply because they were small. There was only like 10 or 12 homes in the towns, part of the town, and then everybody else lived on farms surrounding that. So that was a little bit different, but we lived mostly in the city, and we lived in an apartment. It was an apartment that the school gave my father because he was a teacher. It was just very small compared to the US. It was very small apartment.
Yeah, I went to see
it was like 2 bedrooms, nice dining room, kitchen, separate living room, and then just one bath.
And there were, let's remember, there were 8 kids and 2 adults, so that they shared. You all were in one bedroom?
No, so my and Papa had their bedroom, and of course the baby was in that bedroom. But the living room was turned into kind of a sitting area during the day and bedroom at night. So we had to do that. We had 2 balconies, a nice open dining area. So it wasn't bad once you got inside.
Yeah.
I know you didn't see it from the inside. But,
no, we just saw outside. I did look inside the windows, but...
yeah, it is not as luxurious as you would find. But there are some modern apartments right now that are.
Yeah, they
definitely are, But for that time period for Uganda, it was pretty good. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that our life out there was all that much different from what you would find in the West. It's just that our houses were smaller. Families, probably most families would have 1 car. Education-wise, we were under the British education system. And our schools, and you tell me, Natasha, because you saw what our schools were, and what you saw when you went there hasn't changed that much from where we were. It's quite modern, wasn't it?
It was very nice.
The labs were completely modern, and they hadn't changed at all from when I went to school. So we had a very good education system, and we ourselves had a pretty good education at a very good school. But having said that, that was what was available to the middle class, people who were in trade, people who were professionals, or if you were lucky enough come from a family who had a business. Most of these were Asians. Most of the educated native Ugandans were professionals. Very few had businesses. So there was a big hierarchy in the economic status of these 2 communities. You had the Asians who controlled the economy and who had much of the economy and the money under them. And then you had the bulk of the native people who did low-paying jobs, domestic workers. Although there were many professionals, people in government, all of whom were Native Americans, but Native Africans, Native Ugandans. But there was that difference, and that kind of came through from when it was under British rule, the colonial times, when we had, the white folks from Britain, England, and living a segregated life. The Asians, again, in their own communities, and then the Native Ugandans. So that was how it was when independence came in 1962, and most of the British left. Then you had these 2 societies.
Yes, because let's remember, so India was a colony of the UK, and then so as was Uganda, so like that also spurred a lot of like Indian migration to Uganda, and it's kind of similar all over. Like if you know about South Africa, there's a lot of segregation. Just like in the US, how there was a lot of segregation between the whites and blacks, it existed there as well. And this kind of spurred the civil war when Idi Amin, so Idi Amin was the president of Uganda, and there's actually a movie called The Last King of Scotland.
He wanted to become the president of Uganda, and he, when he first started out, he was a little popular, even among Indians, but then very shortly after he took over, he did a number of things, ousting the Israelis who were there, helping him grow fruit and stuff, and then of course the Indians. And there is a little truth to the fact that the Indians did own the economy then, and they were not, that did block the opportunity from native Ugandans simply because so many businesses passed on from family to family and things like that, right? So even though the population of Indians was very small, about 80,000, and at that time the Ugandan population was 20 million. You would see, if you went through any small town in Uganda, you would mainly come across retail businesses that belong to Indians. So you can understand the resentment that it would come to this. And he was the populist president and the type of person who would kind of do what he did, is oust them, give them 90 days and said, you have to leave. So even if you were a citizen, if you had become a Ugandan citizen at independence, which my dad was, he found a way to find a fault with that conversion from the British to Ugandan, and he canceled your Ugandan citizenship, and so my father became stateless and he had to leave too. So the rest of us, the children, because we were under 21, we were dual citizens at the time, and my mom, who wasn't working outside of the house, had also retained. We were dual until we were 21.
or UK?
No, British and Ugandan.
Yes, because my grandfather studied in the UK, so he had citizenship from when he studied there.
That's like when he came to Uganda, and because it was British.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
but he did study in England, yes.
Okay. Because my grandfather, he really believed that you guys were going to stay in Uganda. That was his home. Yes. He loved it. And before all of this started happening with Idi Amin, Uganda was so safe, and there was
absolutely safe. Yes.
Yeah, there was it was really prospering. And then with all the turmoil that came about when Idi Amin was president, and then the ousting of South Asians, can you tell me about that time, when he started the expulsion of South Asians? Because I know there were a lot of murders by the military and military takeover.
And there were a lot of murders. And fortunately, I must say, there were not a lot of murders against Asians at that time. And there were threats, but maybe because he was afraid of foreign, any kind of intervention. If he killed people that did not belong in his community, he might have feared that, or he simply just wanted them to go away. I don't know what the reason was, but basically it started with him announcing one day that all the Asians had to go be censused, so we had to go and register and give your name and give your thumbprints, and everyone, all the family members. And I remember how they had set up these posts where we all went and did that. People were humoring him because by this time everybody was thinking, very shortly after he took over, that this guy is a little bit crazy, So they didn't know what to expect. And then very shortly after that, he said, that was May, sometime in the spring, he says, okay, Asians have to leave and I'm going to give them 90 days. And we didn't believe him at first. Nobody thought he was serious. Nobody really. And so there were many folks who were not, who were still British. Many of them had relatives in Britain, and they were even wondering what to do. But a lot of them kind of started making preparations to leave. But there were a lot of people like my dad who were Ugandan citizens, and we thought it would go away.
Yeah.
So this was, I would say, about August of that year, 1972, when we realized that this guy is very, very serious.
Yeah.
It's very serious. So my father then had to look for a place to go. Now, he could have gone back to India. The Indian government said if these people from East Africa want to come back, they can come back. And my father had relatives there. His brother, we still had what was the family farm, very small, but it was there. So he started looking, and Australia came up with visas for him early part of August or something like that. But it seemed, and we would have gone there, but it seemed very, very remote to my dad at that time. Australia seemed like almost another planet to us.
Australia is literally another planet. I know, because I grew up there.
But at that time, that's how he felt.
Especially with not being able to fly as often and it being so expensive. You're stuck on that island. I grew up there, so I flew a lot from Australia to the US every year or two. Not every year, probably every couple years, but that is a journey to make to come to the US. It was like you stop in Asia and whatnot. So yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And then I guess because, so like he wasn't able to go to Canada because so basically from this, a lot of the East Africans
ended up in Canada.
A lot of the Indians in East Africa, which actually the group of Indians that are from East Africa, they call themselves East African because the culture is very different than what it is in India. Like it's a very distinct culture because it's kind of a fusion of African culture and Indian culture. If you go or if you've been to East Africa, you know the food has a very different flair. It's freaking amazing. It's like my favorite food ever. But a lot of these East Africans, the Indians, moved to Canada because we're actually Shia Ismaili Muslims, and we're part of like Aga Khan. And the leader of our religion, I guess, who's kind of like similar to the Pope, was friends with Pierre Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister of Canada at the time. So they took a lot of Africans, of Indians from Africa.
Right.
So you want to talk about how you guys weren't able to, you ended up in
So what happened was, so my dad wanted to go to Canada and he had applied primarily because Canada it was also British. So it was going to accept a lot of these people who were without homes from a previous British colony. And also because of the connection that he had with the Aga Khan. But my father didn't make it because he was 49 years old and they told him that they wouldn't know what kind of job to give him at the time. You know, they said that maybe you were a little too old.
Wow.
And they would be happy to take his kids who were over 18, but obviously they couldn't take the minors. But my dad didn't want to split up the family. So then what happened, he was thinking, well, we'll go to Australia or maybe we'll just go back to India. But what happened was the American embassy made an announcement that they would take 1,000 people from Uganda as refugees into the US. When this happened, my oldest sister and I were already sent away with friends. I had just turned 18. This was now September.
Okay.
I had just turned 18 and my oldest sister had just finished university. And we had family friends who were leaving. So my dad said, okay, we were British, remember, we were dual.
Yeah.
He says, okay, so these girls can leave. So there's no sense in all of us staying in all this chaos.
Yeah.
So we were put on a plane with them and we left and we were worried about them and where they were going to end up. But shortly after we left, the American embassy opened up these 1,000 refugee spots and my father didn't want to miss out on it. So he was standing in front of the American embassy since, I don't know how early in the morning, 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever. He said he was not, because he knew there would be a line. And he was
the first in line?
Yeah, he was the first in line. And he received his visas for him and the whole family. And now they just had to wait at that time for instructions from the American embassy on what to do. In the meantime, my oldest sister and I were in a refugee camp in England, worried, sick about the rest of the family.
Yeah, of course.
And finally, and we were really worried for quite a few days because we had left, it was the end of September, not knowing where the family would end up. And we didn't hear anything from them until beginning of November, maybe mid-November, shortly before Thanksgiving. When we heard from them again, they were in a US base in Naples, Italy.
Yeah.
That's where we heard, because they had been transferred. The way I remember, my dad told me they had to buy tickets up to Naples because they had the Ugandan funds. And then from Naples, then they were going to be kind of sent to different places in the US.
Yes, actually, I was in Naples and there's a pretty big military base, US military base in Naples. So that's interesting. I saw that. When Idi Amin did this too, he confiscated like the property from South Asians. So like you guys came to the US with basically no money, like everything was taken from you.
Right. So they allowed per family $1,000, like 100 shillings per person. And since we were, like they were 8 at the time. So they were allowed like $1,000, I think my dad told me. And whatever they could carry with them. That's about it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so that was how you guys ended up in the US, and then they ended up in Pennsylvania, outside of Harrisburg, and you guys started in Carsonville.
Yes, so the way the whole thing opened up in with the U.S. Immigration and the 1,000 spots was actually a Lutheran minister. His name was Pastor Krenz, William Krenz, from the Lutheran services. And he used to keep up with all this news. And when he heard of what was going on in Uganda, he and then his Lutheran services, I guess the committee, the head, whoever, they petitioned the U.S. State Department to see what they could do. And this is how they came up with that 1,000, which amounted to about 1,000 people, were about 15 families maybe, because the families were large, and you know. And so when we ended up in Pennsylvania, because he was the minister of the parish in a town in Halifax near Carsonville, you know. And Elizabethtown and those 3 towns over there, and they wanted us there because we were a big family, and they wanted to sponsor a big family.
Yes.
So that's how we ended up in Carsonville. They had, in Halifax, where they had a job in a shoe factory for my dad.
So he went from being a school teacher to working in a factory, just doing like what do they call it?
Yeah, whatever, like a factory job, you know.
Yeah, like the line.
And, exactly. Making shoes. They were making shoes. They were cutting dyes.
Yeah.
And, you know.
So this is kind of, it shows like they left their past, like what he worked so hard for. He got educated for, went to university to be a math teacher, and he loved his job and whatever, but he was forced into whatever career he got, and he moved here. Both of my grandparents moved to a brand new country they'd never been to.
Right.
And Ma didn't even speak English, right?
No, she spoke very little English, yes.
Okay.
You're right.
And like you guys grew up speaking Gujarati in the house?
Yes, so in Uganda we spoke Gujarati in the house, but we spoke English at school, and because it was a second language for us at that time, they don't do this anymore, but at that time, if you were learning English as a second language, they really frowned on you speaking your mother tongue.
They did that like when I was younger.
When you were younger too, so because they didn't think you would learn it well. And so what happened was us siblings who went to the same schools, we got and friends our age who got used to speaking to each other in English.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
So we spoke to each other in English and kind of both, but at home we spoke Gujarati.
That's kind of like a lot of people who speak Spanish, they speak Spanish at home, and then they have like broken Spanish. But it's funny because when I grew up in Australia, I was put in ESL. I didn't even, I spoke a little bit. I guess my parents would speak to me in Hindi. My dad spoke to me in Hindi. And I was always confused. I didn't understand what ESL was. And I was like, why am I in ESL? I speak English. But I think it was because I was brown. But that's a different story. So for Ma and Bappa, let's talk about mental health and just their lives coming to the US. How did that affect them? And how did it affect you guys too?
So for us, the kids, we were, my oldest sister was 22, 23 when she came here, and I was 18, and the rest were young, but youngest was even 10.
Yeah.
So, and we spoke English, and we were educated in a British type system, and we had read British literature, and of course, we had TV in Uganda, by the way. We only had one channel, but we had all American shows.
Yeah.
So when we came here, first we were fascinated, because everybody's homes were bigger, everybody had everything, not just Indians or one type of community that we saw anyway. Of course there were other issues we couldn't tell right away,
yes.
The other racial things that exist here. But the roads, these massive highways.
And you told me about
that was
them taking you to McDonald's and you could barely finish
Absolutely, yeah. So and everybody ate so much. So when we went to McDonald's, and we loved McDonald's right away because we are Muslim and we eat meat. But the small hamburger and the fry and the small Coke, that was too much for me to finish, you know. That was like more than enough and I could barely finish it. But after about 4 years, I could eat a Big Mac, a medium Coke and a large fry. So that's how I changed. But no, the kids, us children, did not have any difficulty in settling, getting along with people. And honest to goodness, we, the kids, did not. I never felt any prejudice against me.
My fun fact, my mom was like runner-up homecoming queen at her high school, right?
Yeah.
But she didn't even go because she was like shy. That's another reason she didn't even want to make this video with me because she's shy. But that's okay because Naseem's like my mom too.
Anyway, yeah. So we, I think, you know, and we loved it here. We loved the food, and we were in Pennsylvania, and we loved the Pennsylvania Dutch cooking.
It's so good.
Yeah, it was, though, a little bit of a different story for my parents. First, we were isolated from our community, which the kids, you know, we know now that we did not keep in contact with our community and our culture as much as we should have for the sake of the next generation. But for my parents, first they were worried, you know, where were the kids going to get married or who they were going to get married to, because at that time there weren't that many Indians or people of our specific religion and race and where we come from. So they were very worried about that. Secondly, they were very isolated, so they didn't have any social connections. They lost them all. Their friends, people who they used to socialize with, and it was particularly hard on my father because at least my mom, you know, she had us girls, but I think my father needed more people of his age, people who he had connection. Yeah, he had fun with, you know, his friends and done things with, socialized with. So it was very hard on him, and the worry. And then for them, the other biggest thing was, which I think probably they didn't need to worry about because we were finishing schools and coming back, and is financial. I think my father was worried about how he was going to send everybody to college, and because that was one thing that he had made a promise to himself as when he was having kids, that he was going to make sure that all his children at least finish the bachelor's degree in college. So that's
quite something, because to have 8 children at that time, and everyone did like end up going to get a bachelor's degree, and having a good like education. Like Naseem you did chemistry and everything, and she had like a very good job with Mars. Yeah, she's honestly the smartest person I know. So
no, that's not true. But anyway, yes, it was hard on my parents and other people of their generation, and I think particularly the men, you know, because they had to shoulder the burden of making sure the young families grew and had the opportunities that they thought that they wanted for them from the beginning when they were in East Africa. Plus, they lost, you know, my father lost everything he had saved. He was about to retire in a few years in Uganda. Teachers could retire at 55 or something like that. He was 49. And then he probably wanted to do something else. So all of those things were hard.
Just swept away
from them.
That's sad.
So it was very sad. But for the younger people who were in their 20s, even 30s, they had the time to adapt. They spoke, because we came luckily from a British colony, we spoke English well, and so language was not a barrier.
What do you want to share about, because we went back to Uganda and East Africa a couple years ago in 2018. So what was, like, how did you feel going back after so many years? Because was that your first time going back since?
Yes, that was my first time going back to Uganda, because the situation there had been such that until the 90s, mid-90s, until Idi Amin was
and then
a few years after Idi Amin, and Museveni.
So Museveni was is Museveni still president?
Yes, he is still president, unfortunately.
So a lot of times we see in Africa and these African countries where there's either a coup or a new leader that comes kind of from a grassroots movement, and they have all these hopes and promises, but then they end up extending their presidency and kind of becoming more corrupt, and then like there's a lot of corruption and just like not fair, like economically and like for the people. So I went back as a baby. I don't remember this much at all, but I've seen pictures. But like when I was born, in the 90s, we went back, my mom, dad, my brother, and I. And my mom said that back then, compared to when they left, it changed a lot. But then compared from even the 90s until 2018, it changed a lot for the worse. Like there was a lot more poverty, pollution, overpopulation, and things like that.
Yes.
So it's kind of devastating, and I feel like I might have an experience like this when I return to Australia and see like where I grew up, because you kind of have like a picture or snapshot of what you remember and what your life was like at that time. And of course things happen, things change, like of course like places, infrastructure bills, and everything's different. So how was that for you? Like how was that culture shock or that?
Well, the biggest thing, we spent most of our time when we were there in Kampala, which was a beautiful city on 7 hills, and the population of Uganda was 10 million. I think earlier I said 20, but no, it was 10 million at the time. And now it's 38 million. And there is all that pressure of people wanting to come into the cities to make a living.
Yes.
And they don't have any zoning laws like they do here or whatever. So there is so much build up. I mean, I was amazed. Any little space there's a building.
Yes.
And there's so much traffic. It used to take us for me to go from my house where we lived to Kampala Road, very close to our hotel. I did not. I was just about, probably could have started driving before we left riding. It used to take us 10 minutes to get there by car, maybe half an hour, 40 minutes to walk. We would walk. Sometimes you would probably sit in traffic for hours to get from my house, or what used to be our house, to Kampala Road. So that's the sad part. Also the congestion. But there were many positive things, the education over there, they're trying very, I think one thing the government has done is they're providing education to just about everybody. And we saw young kids speaking English even in the remotest towns. Remember when we were going to the national park? And they're very, very talented young people, hardworking young people. So that's really positive. Unfortunately, there is a lot of corruption, and if you go there and you talk to, even say if you have a guide or just some local people who are not afraid, they'll tell you that there's a lot of corruption. The opportunities for young people to get a good job are very, very little, And people try to make things on their own. They drive those little scooters to give you transportation.
Just earning money wherever they can. And this is something that I see in so many countries I travel to, which really breaks my heart, is that someone working as hard or even much harder than someone in the US, and maybe they're just as educated or more educated, they don't have the same ability or opportunities to get even like a job that pays half of what a person here can get.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Or even enough to have a middle class life over there. That part, and I don't think Uganda is alone in that respect. But it was sad for me to see, the city of Kampala going from a really beautiful, pristine town with all these, congestion, traffic, and then the other part was the growth in population. Uganda, they have never had people starving in that country because the climate is so good.
It's right on the equator, so there's
enough rainfall, enough sunshine.
The weather's crazy because it'll rain for like 15 minutes, like a huge downpour, and then half an hour later everything's like completely dry, but lots of vegetation.
And it's 4,000 feet above sea level, so it's not hot and muggy, even though it's right on the equator. But they have never had to, even with the population of, I think it might be in excess of 35 right now. When we were there, it was about 38, 35. They're able to feed themselves because they go back to their own gardens, their own farms. They might come to the city, but they can draw food from.
It's very sustainable.
But people are worried, how long is this going to continue? How long is that population going to go up? Plus the population is growing because there's pressure from refugee immigration from Somalia and Ethiopia and Sudan.
Yeah, different.
And Sudan, which is to the north of it. So yes, they have many problems, but there's been a lot of progress, and it was nice for me to see that when you went into the businesses, you did have local Ugandans as the face of those businesses. That you were dealing not an Asian clerk.
Yes.
So that part is good, Yes, Idi Amin could have done things differently and got control in a different way, maybe slower, but I could understand, where that came from.
Yeah.
So it's still a beautiful country, the pearl of Africa.
It's so incredible, and I can't wait to go back. I'm hoping in the next year or two I can go back there and to Tanzania. It was always my dream. I always felt like a very big tie to Uganda. I know you know this, like when I was growing up, like I was gonna go volunteer over there when I was living in Canada, and I always just had this really big affinity to Uganda and just like my roots and culture, and like that's why the series is about like embracing my roots. And I hope that once I get everything set up in my life and I'm able to travel and do my YouTube channel like from wherever and really focus on that, I can go back and give back to like where my roots are from. So yeah.
Yes, that would be really nice.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
No problem.
I hope you guys learned some things. If you have any questions about Uganda or our past or want to hear more about it, let me know in the comments down below. And I would love if you gave this video a big thumbs up. It really does help me out. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be alerted every time I post a video. But I know this was a kind of different video than my regular ones, but I wanted to share a bit about my past and where I came from. And I think that this will be really educational and really special. It's really special to me, so I hope that you guys really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Bye.